Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today we are going to talk about what I read back in August. Yes, I am wearing the same thing as in yesterday's video because I'm filming these videos back to back, obviously. But anyway, today is my August wrap up, and actually my reading has far improved from July, so let's get into it. First, I finally finished the nonfiction again, and I gotta look at my phone for the title and the authors because the title is long and the authors have names that I just can't seem to remember. But the title of this video is Erzählende Affen, Mythen, Lügen, Utopien, wie Narrative die Welt verändern, and it's by Samira El-Wasil and Friedemann Karik. This is a German nonfiction. The translation of the title to English would be something along the lines of storytelling monkeys, myths, lies, and utopias, how narratives change the world. And it's pretty much what the title says it is. It is a book that talks about how different narratives started existing and what different narratives perpetuate. It kind of starts by talking about the structure of storytelling in general, like the hero's journey, what different types of stories you have, what different types of narratives you kind of have, like, you know, beggar to king or king that falls and so on, rivals, lovers, all the different types of narratives and stories you can have. And then it kind of applies how those narratives then shape how we talk about things like climate change, how we talk about things like racism or race in general, how we talk about gender, and so on. And it's a really interesting book. I really loved a lot of the stuff that they shared. And yeah, I can just highly recommend it if you know how to read German, because this has not been translated into English, and I hope at some point it might be. Aside from the nonfiction, I read 5 fiction books in August, starting with the one I enjoyed least, which was Raphael, which is the 28th book in the Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series, and the series is by Laurell K. Hamilton. I, with this book, am now finally caught up to the Anita Blake series. Yay to that. And I saw about looking this one up that apparently there's a new book planned for like next year, I think 2023 sometime. So yeah, there's not much I can say about this. It was whatever. It was not necessarily one of my favorite entries into the series. Yeah, but it was short. It was like 250 pages, so I was okay with that. Also, this series now, for the last time in a while at least, follows Anita Blake, who is, surprise surprise, a vampire hunter. She lives in an alternate reality of our world. You know, it's paranormal fantasy set in our world is what I meant to say with that. And vampires, werewolves, and so on are out in the open. They have become legal citizens of the US. Anita Blake used to be able to just kill vampires and werewolves on sight. It was what she used to do as a vampire hunter. However, since they have become legal citizens, obviously she can't do that anymore. However, supernaturals still aren't thrown into prison, but a warrant on execution is put out on them and people are called who then kill them. Anita Blake is one of those people. And on the side, she also helps the police solve supernatural crimes, and she's an animator, which means she can raise zombies. So that's kind of the starting point of the series. It's not really where the series is anymore by the end of it, because there's a lot of supernatural politics by the end of it, and a lot of smut, a lot of, you know, vampire, werewolves, monster boyfriends. Yeah, that's what the series is, and I'm happy I'm finally caught up. The next book I want to talk about is The Final Strife by Sara El-Arifi, which is the first book in the I don't know what it is called series. And this was the buddy read for August for my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries. We'll read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman and genderqueer person per month. In September we're reading Babel, so if you're interested in picking it up, the Discord link is down below. So this might seem like it is quite low on my list this month, but that really is because my reading has far improved this month, and this, aside from the Anita Blake book, is the only book that didn't quite make it to 4 stars. It's like, actually there was another book that didn't make it to 4 stars, but this one I gave a total of 3.5 stars. It's a debut Arabian, African-inspired adult high fantasy, and it's a kind of failed Chosen One story, which is very interesting. Within this world, you have 3 different castes, one that has all the power and 2 other castes that are being oppressed. And then every 10 years there's like a competition where people from the leading caste compete against each other to see who will continue on leading them, you know, as the uppermost rulers. And so some time ago, a rebellion stole children from the leading caste, leaving their own children in their stead. And they stole those children to train them to take part in this competition and to hopefully become the new rulers and to, you know, throw down the leading caste. And our main character is one such child that was stolen and who was then trained to, you know, take part in this competition. And that's kind of where this book starts. So overall, I really did enjoy this book. I really enjoyed the characters. I really enjoyed the representation. We have representation for disability in this book. We have representation for addiction. The main romance is sapphic as well. And so, you know, there's a lot of things going for it in that direction. However, on the other hand, I feel like with the storytelling itself, sometimes you could really tell that this was a debut book. But I will go more into depth once I film my review on this, which I still have planned. I just haven't gotten around to doing it yet. But yeah, overall 3.5 stars. I highly recommend this book, especially if you're someone who comes from YA fantasy, although I would be careful because there is a lot of trigger warnings in this, especially in terms of mutilations and racism. So yeah, be careful when going into this. Then next I have Daughters of Sparta by Claire Haywood. This is a Greek myth retelling, and in this one we follow Helen and Clytemnestra from Sparta, and we kind of follow their life stories up to and until just after the Trojan War. This book is very easy to read. It has a writing style that is very fast. However, at the same time, I really liked it because for the first like 250-ish pages, this book really took its time, and it didn't necessarily take up its time in setting up the characters, because this definitely falls into the category of retellings where it's not necessarily a character study, but it's more a study of narratives. So the thing that's central isn't necessarily the 2 sisters as characters, but the 2 sisters and how their narratives oppose each other, and just, you know, their narrative arcs are just kind of almost the opposite of each other. So I found that really interesting, and it just really takes its time setting that up. However, because of the writing style, it's still a quick read. The main thing that I would say is kind of negative is that you're at the start of the Trojan War, like 100 pages from the end, and from that point onwards everything just goes very quickly. And I also didn't necessarily like where the story ended. I understand why the choice was made to keep it as open as it is. The ending and the fate of the 2 main characters is very open by the end. I understand why the choice was made. It just wasn't necessarily the choice that I would have liked this book to make, because I would have liked to see at least more from Clytemnestra's perspective, because while I thought that Helen's narrative was wrapped up pretty nicely, like still open, but you know, still felt wrapped up and still felt like her narrative arc came to an end. It just didn't feel like that for me with Clytemnestra, but that might also be because I know that there's quite a bit of story still coming from her in mythology, or, you know, quite a bit of stuff that happens to her. So yeah, but overall I gave this 3.75 stars. I really enjoyed myself, and it's just, you know, a fun retelling. Well, not necessarily fun because, yeah, but whatever. Next, I want to talk about The City of Dusk by Tara Sim. I finally read this. This was the buddy read for my book club, I think, back in May, and I didn't get around to it then. However, I finally got around to it now. This is obviously also an adult high fantasy. It's kind of hard to explain what this is about. We basically have this city that has different parts, and each part is connected to a ruling family, which then in turn is connected to a god. and they also have a king, and the city and this realm was cut off of the realms of the gods like a long time ago, but because of that the city is slowly dying, and so the 4 ruling heirs have to come together and work together to find a way to make the connection happen again with the realm of the gods and to save the city, basically. I have already filmed a full review of this. I still have to upload it, however, so that one will be coming soon as well, so I will try to keep it short. But overall, I really enjoyed this. I probably enjoyed it more than I would have enjoyed it if this hadn't been the first book I read after July, which was the worst reading month ever. But overall, what I have to say is that I really enjoyed the character work. I really enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed their dynamics with each other. I really liked how all of the 4 main characters had very different motivations. However, those different motivations then led them to work together, or somewhat work together sometimes, somehow. So that part was really well written. The thing where I would say this book wasn't as stellar is the world building, because it felt quite shallow. It felt like we were only ever given what was directly needed for the story to progress. And the world building just felt done in a way where, you know, it wasn't a tip of the iceberg world building where you feel there's tons more underneath, but it felt like it really was just the tip of the iceberg that was the entirety of the world building. So yeah, world building could be better, but aside from that, I really enjoyed the characters. So if you're a character focused reader, I can definitely recommend this, and I gave it 4 stars if I haven't mentioned it yet. And the last book I want to talk about in this wrap up is another one where I intend to have a review up, so I will try to keep it short, and that is Green Rider by Kristen Britton. I finally picked this up. This is a kind of classic fantasy, somewhat. It's quite well known. It's older fantasy. I'm not sure if I would say it's adult or YA. I kind of tend to lean more towards adult, but that's mostly because this was written in a time before YA really was a thing. So you get a lot of fantasy from the time where you have younger characters or younger main characters as well that are also maybe written a bit more casual, but where most of the side characters still are adult. And so yeah, that's why I would generally put this in adult. In this book, we follow Cardigan, who has run away from school because she's scared that she will be expelled from school. And while running away, she comes across a person, a rider, with 2 black arrows in his back. He is something called a Green Rider. He is a messenger for the king. And before he dies, he makes Cardigan promise that she will get the message that he has to the king, because, you know, the future of the realm depends on it. What I really loved about this is that it just exudes fantasy. It just, you know, loves being fantasy. And I feel like I do like my gritty realism sometimes, and I do like my detailed world building where everything is explained, where it comes from, and where it's kind of like pseudo-physics or whatever. I do like my morally grey main characters and characters that have very human motivations and so on. But a lot of times, if you have all of that in books, it also sometimes makes it feel like those books are embarrassed to be fantasy, and like it now has to be all bleak and whatever. And don't get me wrong, this has quite dark passages, but this also is undoubtedly fantasy. You have our main character who just goes through a very classic hero's journey, and you have inspirations that are so obviously Lord of the Rings that it's actually kind of hilarious. And it just, I don't know, I just really loved that. I loved how fantasy this book was, and I will talk more about that in my review, but I can just highly recommend it, especially if you just miss good old fantasy that can be very tropey but is still a lot of fun. And so that was it for the books that I read in August. If you have read any of the books, share your thoughts on them in the comments down below. If you haven't read any of the books, tell me that I make you want to pick them up. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media as well as to my book club will be linked down below, so go and check those out, and I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!